we are covering a heady, weird, in the sky type of topic called psychological safety. And I feel like I am not smart enough to be able to bring this topic to you. So I asked someone to join me today. So this is Ashton, and I wanted Ashton just to take a second to introduce herself.
So like Tony said,
There we go.
great. On?
Is your pack on?
You know, that's it. See, Tony said that he was bringing somebody smarter. I'm not exactly sure. It's on.
It's not on.
It's on.
There we go.
Okay, now it's on. Everybody can hear me? Great. Yeah, as Tony said, he doesn't give himself enough credit because he is very smart and intelligent. But my name's Ashton Beers. I'm really excited to be with you guys tonight talking about this concept of psychological safety. So just a little bit of a background about me. I've been really passionate about mental health, psychological safety, those type of things for quite some time now. I graduated from LBC with my undergrad in counseling in 2020, and then with my master's degree in marriage and family counseling in 2022. December of 2022. So almost 2023, but not quite. And so since then, I've had the opportunity to work in the mental health field since 2020, and so as I've navigated different jobs and different relational dynamics, I have been very passionate about psychological safety, what it is, and then also implementing it in a really tangible way. So I'm really, really humbled to be with you guys because I also kind of feel not super qualified to address such a big topic, but we're going to tag team it and do a great job.
We are going to tag team
thanks
it.
for having me.
There's going to be a lot of back and forth between us as we go throughout our evening together. And then one other housekeeping item that I would love to say is that as we dive into this topic of psychological safety, there is a decent probability that it could invoke some type of emotion in you as we go throughout our time. As we hit certain points, I would love to say that this is like a really fun, exciting leadership topic. It actually has the potential to be a little heavier because as we talk about safety, there may be a very real possibility that there is some experiences from your past or your present that you have felt a lack of safety, psychologically speaking, and so there is a very real possibility that some emotion could have been evoked tonight. So I just want you to know that if that happens, you are not crazy, and you are absolutely, all that emotion is welcomed here tonight, and you can do what you need to do with that. So if you actually need to get up and leave for a couple of minutes, that is perfectly fine and somewhat even invited if that's what is, again, safe for you in that moment. But we're going to address a lot of different things tonight. We're going to address kind of like an introduction of what is psychological safety, and then we're going to talk about here's what it actually isn't. Let's have a foundational understanding of like, here's what it is not, and we want to kind of disband some rumors or some myths or some ideologies that are not actually true about how to pursue safety. And then we're going to go a really deep dive into here's actually what it is. And then practically speaking, because we're all, as leaders, we want to be practical, tangible, take something ethereal and bring it to concrete, and we're going to have some hopefully some really helpful things on how to actually build psychological safety. Well, I want to pray as we enter into our time, and then we're going to hit our first table talk to give you a space to get to know the people at your table for a second, and then answer this first question. So let me pray. Jesus, we give this space and this topic into your hands, and to say, have your will and have your way through it. Apart from the grace of God, we are not safe people, and we need your help, and we need your grace. So as we think about this, as we process, as we ponder, as we reflect, as we are challenged, as we're affirmed, may we sit present with you, God, as you are so present with us. Speak to us, God. We're listening. In your name, amen. Here we go. First question is, what is your knowledge of psychological safety? How would you describe it in your own words? And who is a person maybe that comes to mind that you would describe as safe? So we want to have this baseline understanding first, because I want to be honest, even in the past couple months of talking about psychological safety with some people in prepping for the seminar, some were like, oh, I don't really know what that is. And yet, they're one of the safest people I know, or they have a ton of knowledge about it, and maybe I would somewhat say they're not the safest person I know. So I would love to take about what's your understanding of it, to have a baseline for you, and then we'll dive in. So take a second to unpack that question. Per usual, I think I would like to say that these developed seminars are almost like drinking a bit through a fire hose as we go. So that's kind of intentional, kind of accidental as we go through the prep. We just end up finding there's so much good stuff that we want you to share, but knowing that you have your packets that you can take home with you so that you can dissect it in a little bit more, we are going to give you a fire hose, but we're hoping it's really, really good stuff. So Ashton is going to give us just a brief overview of what we are, the goal of what we're doing here and why we're doing this.
Yes. So, like Tony said, we are taking something that you guys might think of as super abstract, right? What is psychological safety? We might not exactly know what it is when we think of psychological safety, but we've all experienced it, or we've all experienced the opposite of psychological safety, which would be unsafety. And so I think our goal today is really to just take this concept that we might be like, what the heck is that? And walk out the doors with something super tangible to take and implement into our personal lives, into our professional lives, into our lives at church, whatever that looks like. So that is exactly what we're here to do today, and thanks for joining us on the journey.
Yeah, so let's dive in. You ready? Let's do it. All right, so if I can get the clicker. We're gonna hit a little bit of an introduction on what is it from a 30,000-foot view. I'm gonna kind of give a little bit of the layman side of it, and then Ashton's gonna kind of dive into some of the nerdy, brainy side of it, but to kind of lay our foundation of what we have going on. So first off, psychological safety is the security that enables you to bring your full self to the table and team. The ability to live in confidence and competence of who you are without living in fear of judgment or negative consequence. So, simply, you are able to be all that God has called you to be, all your thoughts, all your personality, all of your skills, all of your excitements, all of your nervousness as well, and bringing that to the table with competence and confidence without fear of some type of judgment that could come upon you. Amy Edmondson, who's a Harvard business professor, said this, psychological safety is a belief that the context is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, that speaking up with ideas, questions, or concerns or mistakes will be welcomed and valued. And we definitely know, unfortunately, that not every space we walk into welcomes ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. But psychological safety is going to provide the ability and a belief that that context that you're walking into, that relationship, that job, that family, friendship, whatever it is going to have that type of space. So then when you think about it, here's one of your first blanks that you have to fill in. Psychological safety is created simply when what we say is fully aligned with what we do. Now, here's the thing. Simply is in quotes, because it is radically, almost nearly impossibly difficult to let everything that you say be lined up with what you do, because we are broken sinners, every single last one of us. And we have a sin nature, and we have a selfish nature, and we have an ego that probably is bigger than we would care to admit at times. And so though we can live in health, and though we can live in holiness, our sinful nature creeps out of us, and what we say is not indeed fully aligned with what we do. So we all can be guilty of not providing psychological safety to others. And that is something that we need to know. Now, when we think about psychological safety from, again, we're talking 30,000 foot here. We're gonna bring it down, bring it down, bring it down. We're starting at 30,000 foot. I want to paint it in two different categories that could be helpful possibly. And so the first category is of these two main components is, number one is environments of grace. So what is an environment of grace? Well, there's a book that I'm actually going to quote a handful of times tonight. It's called The Sense of a Leader. And this book is not necessarily how to build psychological safety type book. It's a leadership book about building character. And it's phenomenal. It's in my top 3 books I've ever read on leadership. And I'm going to be quoting it quite a few times because there's psychological safety concepts that they are going to reference. And this is exactly one of them. Environments of grace, the authors say this. Most people know an environment of grace when they see it. They simply point to the results. People feel safe. They grow up. They trust each other. They live authentically. They celebrate each other. They laugh a lot. They produce better. There is just an environment, a culture. If you ever walked into a room and man's like, this space just feels light. Have you ever walked into that space before? I hope you have. That there just is a lightness to the room. There is a laughter to the room. There is a place where there's just grace is welcomed and invited. So environments of grace is number one. Number 2 then is relationships of grace. So almost if you think about like a ladder for a second, where there's 2 rungs on a ladder that you climb up, psychological safety. Number 1 is you have environments of grace on one side of the rung, and then the other side of the rung is your relationships of grace. So you can even, if you're a visual person, you can draw that in your program to help you think about that. Environments of grace and relationships of grace. And that is, this, as they would say, is without a high level of relational trust and vulnerability, grace-filled relationships cannot be fostered. So there is a level within psychological safety in the relationships in which we are fostering and growing in our life, in our leadership, that there is a level of I need to trust you as I go throughout my life and my leadership. But there also is a level of I need to be vulnerable as well. So I need to trust you, but I also need to be vulnerable. There's a give and there's a take as we build these relationships of grace. Now, they're going to get messy. As we know, relationships are messy, and that's where we get hurt, and that's where we get unhealth, and we're going to talk about all that. But to say that there is 2 rungs, there is relationships of grace and there are environments of grace that really do build up what is psychological safety. Now, I'm going to share an example of this. I want to read, there's examples for you, positive and negative. And again, we're going to give you so many different ways to help try to understand this ethereal topic and bring it tangibly for you. So this is just one of the many we're going to try to do it. So here's a positive example of what psychological safety could look like. Imagine a team meeting where everyone sits around a table discussing a new project. The team lead starts by emphasizing that all ideas are welcome and encouraged. There are no bad suggestions. One team member, Sarah, proposes an unconventional approach to the project. Instead of dismissing the idea, the team engages in active listening, asking clarifying questions, and producing constructive feedback. Even though the idea might seem risky, no one ridicules or belittles Sarah for suggesting it. Everyone feels comfortable expressing their thoughts and concerns. And there's a shared understanding that mistakes or unconventional ideas are a part of the creative process. The atmosphere is open, respectful, and supportive. So there's a positive example. Let's read the negative.
I'm going to share the negative. Is mine?
Yeah, it might be. We might have to troubleshoot in a second. I see Johnny getting a mic, though.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you.
So I'm going to share.
You're good.
I'm going to share one of the examples that we have that's more of a negative. I can also just yell. I have a really loud natural voice.
I know you do. There you go. You're good now.
Okay, there we go. All right. We're all about flexibility here, so got to roll with the punches. So the negative example, in another team meeting, the atmosphere is very different. This is our example of psychological unsafety. The team lead often dominates the discussions, shutting down any ideas that differ from their own. When a team member, Alex, hesitantly suggests a different approach to a problem, the team lead interrupts by saying, "That won't work, just stick to what we discussed." Alex becomes quiet and withdraws from further participation. Others in the group notice this, remain silent, fearing similar dismissal. There's a palpable tension in the room, and individuals are cautious about sharing ideas, fearing criticism or embarrassment. The lack of openness and fear of retribution stifles creativity and open communication. So as you can see here, there's a stark contrast between these two examples. I'll take that from you. And so while we're talking a lot about just how this looks tangibly, I do want to go into kind of like the neurobiology, what's happening in your brain in these moments when you're experiencing psychological unsafety, what's happening in your brain when you're experiencing psychological safety, because I think it's really important. The more that we know what's happening with us, the more that we can do something about it to create a different outcome. And so I think that's really important. Honestly, this is like my least favorite part because there's a lot of big words, but we're gonna go for it. So what happens in your brain when you perceive a threat? So like Alex in the team meeting where he was vulnerable, opened up, shared an idea that was risky, he was shut down by his boss. And so in that moment, his brain is perceiving a threat. He was vulnerable and it was shut down. So what happens is your brain perceives a threat, so that's either criticism or you're shut down by your boss or your coworker. And the amygdala in your brain is in the back part of your brain. So we'll talk about the front part is used for rational thinking. The back part is in charge of sensing danger, emotions, and that kind of stuff. So in that moment, Alex's back part of his brain is activated, and the amygdala is saying, you're in danger, you're in danger. Think of it as like a fire alarm. When a smoke detector picks up smoke and the fire alarm starts going off. He's warning Alex, you're in danger, you're in danger. That message gets sent to the hippocampus, which is telling your brain, remember this danger so that in the future, you don't make the same mistake of being vulnerable. And then the hypothalamus is in charge of releasing cortisol and adrenaline to the body, which invokes that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, which is how we respond when our brain perceives a threat. And so that's kind of what's going on. And that can happen literally within a matter of seconds. So it's really hard in the moment to understand what's happening with you. There's probably literally a split second from the amygdala picking up, I'm in danger, to your response. And your response could be defensiveness, it could be shutting down, it could be leaving the situation, or it could be a fawn response where you completely shift into whatever the person that is ridiculing you wants you to be, or what you think you want them to be, to people please or to appease them. And so I think it's really important for us to kind of understand, the big words really aren't that important, but it's kind of important for us to understand, okay, is the back part of my brain activated right now? Am I protecting myself? Am I kind of seeing everything as a threat, or am I in the front part of my brain where I'm able to work out of a space that is rational and where I'm not seeing everything as a threat? And our brains, even though they are wired for connection, they are wired to protect us. And so our brain is going to pick up on these things so that in the future we don't put ourselves in danger again, because it would be stupid, right? You put your hand on a hot stove. Your brain is going to take in that information and that data, so in the future you don't put your hand on the hot stove. Hopefully, yeah. And just like in these situations, if I'm sharing something in a youth staff meeting, and Tony, which he never does this, by the way, he's very psychologically safe. If he were to shut me down, well, the chances are the next time we go into a youth staff meeting, I'm probably not going to open up and be vulnerable and share because my brain tells me it's unsafe to do so. And so that's kind of the background of what's happening in the brain when we perceive unsafety. However, when a culture of psychological safety is built, our brain releases chemicals like oxytocin, which leads us to have increased teamwork, trust, and overall higher relational satisfaction in the workplace. And like I said before, when psychological safety is present, we're more likely to be working out of our prefrontal cortex, or our rational brain, as opposed to the limbic system, which is our emotional brain in the back. Which, by the way, when the back of the brain is, your amygdala and all of that is calling the shots, it's really, really difficult for you to engage the front part of your brain, which is where a lot of your decision-making, your rational thoughts come from, and so that can be really hard to get good results from a team if you're constantly in that hyper-vigilant state because you're working out of your emotional brain. Moving forward. Mirror neurons is another thing that I kind of wanted to touch on here for a second. They're what enable us to observe an action and then to understand the intention of the action and then mirror the same action to birth the same result or vice versa. So I kind of already touched on this, but mirror neurons, we can be observing a situation. So like Alex, if I'm Alex's teammate and I'm observing him get shut down by the boss, my mirror neurons are going off and saying, this isn't happening to you directly, but you're sensing it as though it's happening to you. So I'm picking up on things that I might not be experiencing firsthand, but my brain is still storing those through mirror neurons in order to protect myself in the future. So when we see others take risks in a safe place, our brain also tells us that it's safe for us to do that in the future. And so it's really important. I also want to talk a little bit, now that we got all the brain stuff out of the way, even though it's very important, we can move on to some of the more exciting stuff. A really big question that we need to answer before moving forward is why? Why are we putting all of this effort into something that feels so intangible and abstract? Why, for you as a leader, should you care about psychological safety? They're just feelings and emotions. Why can't my workers just separate that from themselves and let's get the result? So why? Because people's experiences matter, number one. As humans, I'm sure that maybe not all of us are believers in the room, but a lot of us are. People's experiences matter. People matter. People have experiences, emotions, and very subjective experiences that we might not agree with, but that still should matter because we care about them. God created us to care about the whole person, not just parts of a person. And so it's really important, and this is a motivating factor for why you as a leader should put in the work to be psychologically safe. It also gives your team a chance to actually thrive instead of just survive and get by. It helps cultivate a culture where thriving is actually possible and surviving is not the norm. When people experience this on a day-to-day basis, there's also increased ownership, dependability, and productivity. So not that your motivating factor for creating psychological safety should be, okay, well, if I create a psychologically safe place, my workers or my team is going to perform better. That shouldn't be your sole reason, but that's a pretty good reason, right? To be able to create a space where, okay, I know that if I prioritize this, then I'm going to receive the results on the back end. And I did want to touch on an example of a real-life study that was done, and this is known as Google's Aristotle Project. They actually assessed hundreds of teams across Google and assessed factors that were common among their highest performing teams. The study,
No, you're good.
Oh, I did good, okay. The study, like I said, was conducted over several years, taking a look into hundreds of teams. And what they found was that more than experience, more than credentials, more than education, psychological safety was the determining factor of the highest producing teams across Google, which I find very interesting, because a lot of the times we're looking for who has the most experience, who has the highest degree, who, you name it, who has the credentials. And while those things are important, psychological safety is equally as important.
So we want to take a moment to let you talk amongst your table as we did our 30,000-foot science-y part, which I also love. Thank you, Ashton, for giving us that, that nerdy, let's understand the brain as we begin, and some of the why it's important. So can you identify a time that you addressed a problem with someone and you left the conversation feeling like you could approach them in the future? How did that person respond to you bringing up the issue? What was their body language, their tone of voice, their words, their attitude, etc.? And then the next question is just the inverse of that. Can you identify a time that a problem with someone that you left feeling unsafe to approach them in the future? And we want you to, as we go through these questions, also being careful over like sharing experiences, but maybe if there's like close proximity of knowing people, that being careful with just the name dropping and whatnot of these experiences. But talk about those things from a positive to a negative contrasting, and how did that feel? What was the differentiation between those two? So a positive example or a negative example, go there for a few minutes amongst your table as you talk about that. Have fun. All right, here we go. So again, before we dive deeper into what it is, we want to have a conversation around what it is not, because there can be a lot of misconceptions around what does it mean to be safe. And we want to have a holistic conversation. Yes, we want to applaud and commend and build into all of us as leaders what it means to be psychologically safe, but we also want to address here's what it's not, and we want to avoid some of these things or these misconceptions of the sort. So number one is simply, it's not just being nice. Being nice is good. Being nice is helpful. It's something that we should all be doing on a daily basis. At the same time, just to say, oh, I'm being nice, does not equate to I am therefore psychologically safe. So we need to, one, get that straight. The second one is to say that it is not a guarantee that when you're sitting around a table, that if you come up with an idea and the idea stinks, that it's going to be applauded. It does not mean that. Now, should we be jerks about poo-pooing the idea? No, we should not be. But it's not a guarantee that every single time you bring an idea to the table, oh, I thought this was meant to be a safe space. No, but the idea still really stunk. Like we're not gonna applaud a bad idea at the same time. Hopefully, we're not going to swing the pendulum to being a jerk, but we're not going to always applaud it. So that's something that we need to know. Thirdly, we need to know that it is not the freedom from conflict. Who in here says I really don't like conflict at all? Any show of hands in the room? Like you can be honest about that? Yeah, great, awesome. Thank you for that honesty. It is not a freedom from conflict. So safe spaces, safe friendships, safe bosses, safe marriage spouse does not mean that there will not be conflict. And we would actually say that you are not fostering a space of safety if there is a complete avoidance of conflict all the time. So it's not a freedom from conflict. Also, it is not a permission to just slack off. It is not a permission to step into laziness. Like, oh, that's just my personality. No, you're just being lazy. Like there's a need to say, okay, I can't just slack off because I feel safe or I feel like I can be my real authentic self. Okay, cool. But there still is a job that you have to get done and a task that you need to get done and do it with a deadline and so on and so forth. There is not a permission to slack off. Here's an interesting one. Confession that never has consequence. Confession that never has consequence. This is a tough one because confession in Christianity is a beautiful thing. Heavy, but beautiful. Confession in a job is difficult. And just because I'm confessing something doesn't mean I'm going to be written off as, oh yeah, I was bold, I was vulnerable, I was courageous. There still may be consequences to that. And we need to wrestle with what does that mean and how do we go about that when we ourselves maybe need to confess something or we're dealing with someone who is confessing something to us. What does that mean with consequence or lack thereof? How about this one? It's not the absence of accountability. Stepping into psychological safety does not mean that there is an absence of I'm going to sharpen you and you're going to sharpen me and we're going to hold each other accountable again to X, Y, Z, for whatever it is, fill in that blank. It's not an absence of accountability, but sometimes in the name of safety, we can say, oh, well, I can do what I want because this is a safe person. We need to be careful about how we think about that. Additionally, it's not a license to the following things. It's not a license to whine. Now, tell us. we complain a lot. We are complainers. And in the name of safety, especially if it's like close friends or colleagues that you get along with, it's really easy to get around the water cooler and just complain and whine because there's people who can empathize with you. And that is not psychological safety. That's being rude and not respecting and not careful with our words. So there's a fine line between, hey, I'm going to process this now. Is there something like talking through, maybe some of you, maybe I've used the term like a lightning rod person, someone who is this very safe that you can share the deepest, rawest stuff in your mind and heart so that when you go, you share with that one person so that it doesn't go anywhere else. And they ground the lightning and make sure that it's safe in that one spot. Is it okay to whine in that moment? Yes, within reason. Like, I'll be honest, like my wife is one of those lightning rod people that I just like, I don't fully believe this. I don't fully like really think this, but I just need to get it out of my system so that it's grounded right here so that no one else feels that strike of lightning, if you will, and so on and so forth. So there is this tension point within whining that we need to be careful about, but there is this thing called lightning rods that we could talk about some other time, but I'm already going on too long on this one point alone. Gossip. Gossip. It is not a license to gossip. Same thing, water cooler, friend chat. We are talking about people. Psychological safety says, oh yeah, I'm going to say whatever I want to whomever I want about whoever I want. No. That is not psychological safety. We cannot, should not, dare not gossip. That is not what we ought to do. Thirdly is steamroll. It is not a license to steamroll. Again, that can be chalked up to saying, oh, well, that's just my personality. No, that's you being insensitive. You need to know how to control your personality, even if you are a driver, even if you are very, very opinionated. That's good, that's great, that's awesome. But you need to learn how to control that at the same time. And to be my full personality does not mean that I do it without consequence or without understanding how this is going to impact the person around me. So there's that. And then fourthly is criticism. It's not a license to criticize. Psychological safety, we do way more criticism than critical thinking. In a previous seminar with Tiffany Lentz, we unpacked this concept actually of what is the difference between a critical thinker and someone who is a criticizer. And you can go back onto our YouTube channel and watch that seminar with Tiffany because it was awesome. She did a killer job with it. But we do a lot of criticizing, and rather than doing that, the unhealthy version, the healthy version is just being a critical thinker, and we need to do more of that. So that's a lot of what the is-nots is. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the ungracious outcomes of unsafety. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll have you guys fill in some of these blanks, but now we're just gonna roll through them because, if I'm being honest, there's probably a handful of these that maybe you can relate to through an experience, unfortunately, a person again from your past, or maybe even your present. And again, we want to take a moment. And actually, I meant to say this at the very beginning, but there is so much opportunity here for us to think about other people, and I want us to equally or more so think about us. Take the plank out of our own eye before we take the speck out of someone else's. So where do you fall short in this list? So ungracious outcomes of unsafety can lead to mistrust. That I simply don't trust you. And we're actually going to talk about what's the difference between trust and psychological safety. There actually is a difference between the two, and we'll unpack that in a little bit. But mistrust, ungracious outcomes of unsafety is that there is just conflict over and over again. There's just this butting heads, and we don't know why we're griping and why we're biting each other and why we are going at each other's throats, but there just seems like there's always this conflict when we see ungracious outcomes of unsafety. And remember that ladder reference I said, the two rungs, the relationships of grace and the environments of grace. So this is literally the antithesis, the opposite of its ungracious outcomes of unsafety. These are basically all the rungs of what could be the unsafety ladder. Then there's rigidity. And just this legalism, this letter of the law that's just not helpful, not healthy. Following rules is obviously important. Structure is important. Accountability is important. Rigidity could cause a lack of feeling safe. One-upmanship. There's just this competitive nature that just is there of like everyone is just trying to get the leg up. That's a really not fun environment to be a part of, and there's just this constant one-upmanship of heavy, not fun word to throw out, toxicity. An ungracious outcome when there's unsafety is there just toxicity, and the way that I would say that toxicity resonates is take the strengths and the positive sides of who you are and take the shadow side then of what that is. We all have wonderful, beautiful strengths that God has equipped us with and personality traits, but we also have the shadow side, the negative side, the sinful side that is as a mirror to it as well. Toxicity is when all that shadow side stuff is starting to pop up. Like you could see all the good that it could come from it, but really anything but negative and nasty is coming. That's toxicity that is happening there. Then there's a really not fun word, manipulation. With ungracious outcomes, there can be manipulation. Not can be, there usually is. Small ways, big ways, it rears its ugly head. Artificial harmony. I don't even know how many seminars it was ago, 2, 3 seminars ago, Johnny and I got the chance to talk about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And one of them was this talking about artificial harmony and that, yeah, we're getting along okay on the outside, but in reality, we're annoyed at each other. We're fearful of each other. We are not trusting each other. We're rigid with one another. We're not thinking the best of one another. Like that is artificial harmony. And unfortunately, we probably have all been in one of those spaces before of artificial harmony. Then there's a bunch of other things like there's decreased productivity. Ashton spoke about that, where there's when safety is going well, there is productivity, which is great. It's not it's not our absolute that we go for, but it is absolutely good. And there is decreased productivity. There's decreased problem solving. When people's unhealthy side is coming out of them, they're not really able to think as rationally or as emotionally healthy or logically, and problem solving skills just plummet. And again, you may have been in that space before. Maybe you have felt that before in your own health when you're like, man, I'm not feeling healthy right now. I'm not feeling the most safe of environments, and I feel like my problem-solving skills is not good. Decreased camaraderie, decreased confidence. Again, maybe you have felt this. Maybe you've seen these things before, whether it's within your teammates interpersonally or whether it's in your own self intrapersonally, decreased those things. And then also, there's decreased fun. It's just not fun to be in that type of environment. When there's absence of environments of grace and relationships of grace, it's just purely not fun. Is fun our end goal? No. But is fun helpful? Yep. And then freedom. There's decreased freedom. Everyone is feeling like they're looking over their shoulder. Everyone's feeling like there's certain things they can't say, etc. And from a sense of a leader, they say this: in an atmosphere of ungrace, all favor and love must be earned. Must be earned. And then they also say developing healthy relationships in an unhealthy environment is nearly impossible, as is constructing a positive environment with a group of negative people. So that was a lot. So let's take a moment to talk about it at your tables, because we did cover a lot of things. Of what psychological safety isn't and the ungracious outcomes, those 2 lists, which descriptor or descriptors strike you the most, you're pondering the most on, and why? Take some moments, process that with your table. Go for it.
Before we move on to the next section, talking more about what psychological safety is, I do want to touch on some things that Tony was sharing about psychological safety isn't a license to whine, gossip, steamroll, or criticize. It isn't. And those things are actually the exact opposite of psychological safety. Those are the things that create and foster an environment of unsafety. And so while we're looking to not permit those things within ourselves by way of being psychologically safe, they're actually, like when you participate in those, that's actually fostering an environment that is not psychologically safe. And before moving on, I thought it was really, really important to kind of talk about, we're kind of putting two sections up here, right? Psychologically safe, psychologically unsafe. And tonight isn't to label people. Tonight, if you see yourself on one side or the other, that's a good thing because you're being honest with yourself, because everybody is on both sides at one point or the other. So as you're going through this and as you're self-assessing, I don't want there to be shame that's coming over you as you're saying, oh crap, well, I was a little psychologically unsafe earlier with my husband or with my coworker or with whoever, with my friend. You will go back and forth between the two because you're human, and that's okay. And so before we keep moving on, I just want to challenge you guys as you're looking at these things, and if you see these patterns, these more unhealthy patterns in your life, they're trying to tell you something. You might have an unmet need that you need to explore a little bit more and figure out the function of your behavior or the function of your patterns so that you can become a healthier person for yourself and for those around you. And handle yourself graciously. There's something, which is not what tonight is about, but it's called self-compassion. And as you're going through these things, as you're looking at where I may fall short, have compassion for yourself, knowing that these things are telling you about your unmet needs or about other things, about things in your life that have created these patterns. This is not to shame you, and I don't want you to walk away tonight holding your head low because there's parts of your life where you may be psychologically unsafe or where you are, like all of us are. I am, Tony is, everybody. So I think the more that we can embrace that, the more that we can actually create an environment conducive to growing and learning and moving forward. So I did not want that to get lost here tonight. And be courageous enough to do the self-exploration. So we're going to move on from that to talk a little bit more about what psychological safety is. And so there's 4, let me see. Tony, do you have the clicker? Oh, got it. We're going to talk a little bit about what psychological safety is. So there's 4 pillars, if you will, to psychological safety, and they build upon each other. So you can't have the second without the first. You can't have the last without the first 3. And so the first pillar I want to talk about is inclusion safety. And so this pillar must be present before you can move on to any of the other stages. In this pillar, the basic human need to be included is satisfied, and the basic human need to be a part of something bigger than yourself is also satisfied. So inclusion safety says and feels like you matter and you belong here. So if you're getting hired at a new job and you're entering a new space with new people, new bosses, you're going to be in this first pillar where you're looking for inclusion safety. Am I safe enough to be a part? Is this environment going to be inclusive for me? Am I going to belong here with the people that are already here? This also looks to like inviting and asking and sharing. So people who are already a part of a group, whether this is a church, a team at your work, create space by inviting the new person or inviting a person that might not be as familiar with your group to share, asking questions about the other person, showing genuine concern, and then also taking that vulnerable risk to share of yourself too with somebody that might be new. Obviously, this doesn't mean oversharing your whole entire life story, but kind of dipping into the humanity and showing that person that it's okay to be human on your team, in your church, on your sports team, whatever that looks like. So next we're going to move into The next phase, which is learner safety. So after a person has that first basic need met where they are included and they belong, they can move into a space where they can actually learn. You can't get the second stage without the first. So somebody has to feel a part before they can take part in the learning process. And in this stage, it's very important that you learn that the goal is growth and not perfection. Because in this phase, you experience through action that your leaders value your ability to learn from mistakes rather than you having it right the first time. So this stage encourages people to develop a growth mindset to take risks and grow from their mistakes rather than become threatened by them. So this is a stage where a leader needs to normalize that mistakes will happen and here's how we handle them, rather than you better get that right the first time, or somebody on your team makes a mistake and you criticize them for it or you belittle them. That is not creating a culture where it's okay to embrace mistakes. And then that's also denying the humanity in your own self. Because there's going to be a time where you're a leader and you make a mistake. How do you want your team to treat you when you're the person that makes a mistake? And so it's in this phase, we're getting really comfortable with the uncomfortable reality that mistakes are going to be a part of our everyday life. And how do we handle them? When we create this safety, we get to shift our mindset from I have to be afraid of mistakes to a mistake is an opportunity to grow and move forward. So we're separating the mistakes here from fear. And then we're also in this stage able to model what asking for help looks like. So that's very important to be learning new concepts. You can't really learn without making mistakes. And so there's a lot of times where people, instead of embracing their mistakes, they try to hide them. Well, then you're not actually learning through them, so then you're trying to move on to the new stages without a full grasp of the concepts that you're trying to learn. Contributor safety is the third phase of psychological safety, and this is where a person is fully engaged in the value-creating process. So we're included, we're learning, and we're ready to take what we're learning and bring value to our team, bring value to the people around us, because we have gone through the first two phases. So this happens when a person feels included and equipped to apply what they have learned. And this is a stage 2 where the leader is kind of taking a step back and allowing the team member, allowing the person to have more autonomy over their work and over what they're doing. And the last stage, challenger safety. This one is definitely my favorite stage. Once again, you can't have it without the first 3. And it's so intriguing to me because challenger safety seldom happens. A lot of times we get through the first 3. There's not a lot of teams and spaces that reach this final phase of psychological safety. It's the highest level of psychological safety because it requires us to take risks, to take a personal risk, to be vulnerable, to challenge the status quo. So once a person has been included, once they've been able to learn and accept mistakes, once they're contributing, they can step into this space where they feel safe enough to challenge a team member or challenge a leader, and in an appropriate way. But if you don't have those first 3 parts, you're going to be in a spot where you're probably not going to challenge or speak up or share an idea that might be ridiculed out of fear and as a means to protect yourself. So really the safety component is key here. And like Tony said, not that everybody's going to agree with you, but you can speak up and challenge the status quo knowing that you are not going to be belittled and knowing that you're going to be met, even if there's conflict when you do it, because there will be conflict, that's going to be handled healthily, and it's not going to be dismissed or avoided. That your input and your challenge matters to the leader and to your teammates. I have a very interesting story. So my first my first job right out of grad school. I was a family-based therapist, which is a very, very, very intensive level of therapy. And I was getting trained by somebody. It was during COVID. He did not want to leave his house because of COVID, which was totally fine. I respected that. But I needed somebody who was going to be out there with me, teaching me the ropes. And so a lot of the time I was left alone. My needs were not getting met professionally to be able to be trained appropriately and to have the competencies to move forward, to be able to contribute to my office. And I was brand new to this environment. I'm still in inclusion safety. I don't know if I'm a part. I don't know if I belong. I'm right out of school. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know that my needs aren't getting met. But I haven't kind of walked the course of psychological safety to know if it's safe enough for me to speak up and say, hi, I'm Ashton and my needs aren't being met. I didn't know if I was going to be told, too bad, like you need to rely on your education, too bad. Like I had no idea how I was going to be met in that moment. And by saying, I don't have it all together, I need more help, I was terrified that that vulnerability was going to be mishandled. And so I finally got the courage, and the ironic thing is this is one of the most psychologically, that job was one of the most psychologically safest places I have been and probably ever will be in my life. But I didn't know that yet because I was still in the first stage. And so I remember finally telling my bosses, like, you know what, this isn't it for me. It's not working. They were encouraging me, okay, well, you need to step in, they didn't say this, but step into that challenger safety, and you need to say something to the person that was responsible for training me. And I didn't. I couldn't. I would role play it with my bosses. Okay, this meeting, I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, like, here is where you're missing the mark. Here's what I need differently from you. And my brain literally wouldn't let me do it because I didn't have proof that if I took that risk, that it was going to be received well. I didn't have proof that if I put myself out there, that I wasn't going to be told, well, too bad, or you're on your own, or whatever. I thought that I was going to be belittled. I thought I was going to be invalidated and dismissed. And so because of that, I stayed in a space where I was terribly uncomfortable with what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. And so it kept me, the absence of psychological safety kept me from getting my own needs met. Now, after I had worked for this place for about a year or two, I felt very comfortable to move into the challenger mode because I had seen evidence through my coworkers that it was a safe space to do that. But in the beginning, I didn't know that, and so I couldn't move into that space. And so the bottom line here is really that people need to experience psychological safety and not just hear the right words from you in order to have a full understanding of what psychological safety is and to behave in a way that is psychologically safe. So that was kind of a lot, but the biggest thing here is just that you can't have one of these pieces without the whole. So they're all very important. When you're looking at your teams, when you're looking at the people around you, kind of go through and assess, how am I treating people who are in each of these stages, and how am I helping them along and equipping them to reach the challenger stage to where they feel a part enough, like they've learned enough, like they've contributed enough to be who they are, and where I'm welcoming that challenge.
Excellent. Here we go. So, as we continue to dive into what it is, we're going to continue to give you different vantage points now. So Ashton just very adequately went through the learner, the challenger, the collaborator, and the inclusion. Also, we noted that there's a word discrepancy on the page. It says contributor. In the graphic, it says collaborator. They are basically one and the same in the sense of the word and what we're trying to get across. But Ashton even said herself, contributor is even minusculely more what the word is that she would be going for here. So learner, challenger, collaborator, inclusion. Let's now talk about a different angle of what is psychological safety, and that is trust versus psychological safety. Because again, I did say that there's a difference between the two. And if I'm being honest, it can be slightly splicing hairs on this one, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want you to see there is a difference between someone that is trustworthy and someone that is psychologically safe. Let's unpack this for a second. So Tom how you say his last name, who's an expert in safety cultures, says this: the primary difference between psychological safety and trust is that psychological safety consists of beliefs concerning the group norms and how they are viewed, while trust focuses on the beliefs that one person has about another. So psychological safety has more of a group norm culture bent, whereas trust is more of like this one-on-one interpersonal space that's going on. Let me give you some examples that can maybe parse this out. Number one, trust asks, will I give someone the benefit of the doubts? Between my boss, my colleague, my spouse, will I give someone the benefit of the doubts? Psychological safety asks, will others give me the benefit of the doubts? So trust is this one-on-one thing, where psychological safety is this like group culture norm concept. Trust asks or says, I believe my boss is competent to give good ideas, while psychological safety says, I know that if I give pushback on my boss's idea, think around like a team table or in a huddle, that it will be received graciously. What's the culture of that space? Trust will ask the question, will I forgive someone if they wrong me? Do I trust them enough that I'm going to forgive someone if they wrong me? Where psychological safety says, will others forgive me if I wrong them? What's the culture like in that way? Trust says, I believe my direct report is efficient in leading us through completing tasks. While psychological safety would say, I know that my boss will value everyone on the team while completing that task. So you're kind of getting the difference here between the two. So it's very entirely possible that just because you have trust does not mean that you have psychological safety. And I'm just going to kind of leave it at that between the two, while there's a graph that might also be helpful just to parse this out one level further. So on the one side, we have one person to another. That's a little bit of that trust space. Then we have psychological safety that's between a whole group. Up above, there's this idea that a conviction that I'm going to be treated benevolently and graciously and good, whereas the other side of the spectrum, that I have a conviction that I will not be treated kind and benevolently and good. So between this graph we're going to fill in here, when you have a conviction that you're going to be treated benevolently, and this is like a one-on-one concept, that's what trust is. That is the baseline, basic understanding of what trust is. While if you have between a whole group and a culture and a norm established, that is what psychological safety is. On the flip side, when you do not believe that you are going to be treated kind and gracious, forgiving and benevolently between one-on-one, that's usually where the guarded relationships come into play. And that just takes over the guardedness, looking over my shoulder, invulnerability, etc. But then between a whole group setting, that's where toxic politics come into play. And again, there's that everything that we said was the ungracious outcomes of the one-upmanship and the rigidity and those things. That's where the toxicity begins to pull in. So again, that's the difference between trust and psychological safety. One other angle that we want to unpack for you is these things called zones. The zones of psychological safety. So we have here this graph of psychological safety on one axis, and then you have performance accountability on the other. Both are needed in a healthy work environment. And also, we talk about the rungs of the ladder, environments of grace, relationships of grace. Both are needed, safety and accountability. However, though, let's talk through the four of what these are. So first off, there's the comfort zone. There is here, teams have high psychological safety and they have low accountability. It's a relaxed place to be, and people likely feel safe and familiar and at ease, and it's fun and it's lighthearted and people can crack jokes and so on and so forth. But while stable, there's no push for creativity and no push for growth and no push for metrics and goals and so on and so forth. And so comfort, I've said this before from a stage. I can't remember if I've said it from this stage before, but as a Christian, I would say if we are constantly living comfortable in our Christianity, I don't think that's correct Christianity. that we are called towards uncomfortability in Christ, and so comfort zone is not necessarily what we're going for here in psychological safety, while zone number 2 is the apathy zone. And the apathy zone is a low level of accountability and a low level of psychological safety. In other words, there's a lack of motivation, support, communication with limited opportunity for growth and development. Individuals tend to no longer care about their work. So if I believe that my boss doesn't really care about me, doesn't have my best interest at heart, and he also does, for some reason, there's not a motivation for me to put in the work or keep me in check or whatever, then I'm just going to be apathetic. And that's not fun, and that feels miserable. And so to have low levels of accountability, low levels of psychological safety is an apathy zone. And then the third zone we have is an anxiety zone. This is a fun one, where there is just high accountability and still low levels of accountability, or low levels of psychological safety. A state of stress, fear, uncertainty. Anxiety zone signals that teams feel overwhelmed, unable to take risks, and are fearful of being judged or criticized. If I was to go around and ask, have you ever been in the anxiety zone? And what's that experience been like? I'm sure that all of us have an example of being in the anxiety zone. But I would wonder, if I was to ask, have you ever put someone in the anxiety zone with way too high levels of accountability and low levels of psychological safety? Has that ever happened to you? I know that's happened to me. And I've been the culprit of someone's unsafety. And we need to work against that toward the fourth zone, which is the learning zone. Where the learning zone, though where Ashton talked about the learning zone of this, the first one, that inclusionary safety, where there's a learning environment that's happening. This one is where it's like the pinnacle and the top of the four, where teams have high psychological safety, high accountability. There's a balance between challenge and support. There's a balance between relationships and results. We're going to value both of those together. Both are equally important, and we're going to do that well together. It's an optimal environment for innovation and growth as teams feel empowered to take risks and embrace challenges and learn from failures. That's huge. And continually improve. To learn from failure. And we're even in the practical, when we get to how to build it, this is a lot of what we're going to speak toward, actually. About embracing challenges, learning from failures, continually improving. This is the learner zone. Friends, as leaders, we are called forever to be learners. If traditional school wasn't your thing, cool, that's okay. We are still called to be learners. If school was your absolute thing and you nerded out over stuff, cool, great, you haven't arrived. You got to keep learning. We all need to keep learning. As learners, we stop being efficient leaders if we stop learning. Learning of our people, learning of our work, learning of our passions, learning of our shadow sides, learning. We all need to be learning nerds, every single one of us, over this topic and of ourselves and of others, so on and so forth. Here's a summary statement or two when we talk about accountability and psychological safety. Accountability without safety is just simply rigidity. And safety without accountability is laziness. So if I'm going to be accountable with no safety whatsoever, it's just going to create a culture of get it done, no one cares about me, and I'm just going to, it puts you in this like tense mode that I can imagine all of us have felt in some form or another. There's this rigidity, but safety without accountability is just a laziness in the way that we pursue levels of excellence and boundaries and so on and so forth. Here's another statement for you that is accountability without safety is fear-inducing, like that anxiety zone. But safety without accountability is actually fabricated freedom. So think about that for a second. Sometimes we really like a lack of accountability. That feels free. It actually isn't. Freedom is more where there is healthy rules and boundaries and parameters to fully be who either God called you to be or the job is asking you to be or whatever it may be. But if there is no accountability whatsoever, it's actually not freedom, it's chaos. And so safety without having any levels of accountability is actually the opposite of freedom. It's fabricated freedom. Here's another quote from Amy. She said, fear often stops people from voicing their ideas and opinions. No one wants to look ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, or negative. I know, I certainly don't want to look like any of those. So the way we avoid looking like that is by not asking questions. We shut down, by not admitting our weaknesses or mistakes, or by not offering our ideas. That's when companies' learning, innovation, and progress are at risk. How true is that? So now, let's take some time at your tables and discuss these very things that we just talked about. Number one, what are some of the lies that blind us from the comfort zone, that blind us in the comfort zone? So we're going to look all around this graph, the comfort, the apathy, the learning, and the anxiety. Lies that blind us in the comfort zone, ruts that stunt us in the apathy zone, and stressors that paralyze us in the anxiety zone. You could probably take 20 minutes on one of those alone. So pick one and roll with it for a few minutes. And if you get to a second one, great, awesome. But take some time to discuss that for the next 5 minutes or so. So we are hopping into the practicality of this whole thing. Let's wrap this into so what? Yeah. Why does this matter? And how do we do this practically? We have 8, and we really hope that these are going to be helpful to you. Ashley hits with the number 1.
So this is arguably, all of it's important, but this is really an important part of our conversation tonight because these are meant to equip you guys to take them and implement them into your relationships. We talked a lot about work, but all of these things can be implemented into any relational dynamic that you experience. And so this is what I'm most passionate about, so I'm very excited to talk about this portion. Tony talked about a book that kind of influenced his part of the presentation, and I also wanted to share a book. It's called The Psychological Safety Playbook, Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human. And the book is very tangible, very straight to the point, where it goes through different ways, different objectives that we can kind of be more psychologically safe in different plays, which I'm a sports person, so I love kind of diving in. Yes, it's the Psychological Safety Playbook, Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human.
What I will do is, if you registered for this seminar, I send an email out always with the links, like the certain things. I'll put the links for both of these books into that email that will go out in the next 24, 48 hours.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so we're going to jump into the different plays and then also how do we execute these plays. So the first one that we're going to move into is communicate courageously. So what does this mean? How can we implement this? So a tangible way that we can do this is by welcoming different viewpoints. A lot of times this can sound like, what am I missing? Asking yourself, acknowledging your limits and acknowledging that other people around you have things to bring to the table that you might not have, and being comfortable in that space to invite them to the table and accept their viewpoint, even if it differs from yours. Also, opening up. I love that this book talks about leading through your humanness, because that's how we connect with other people. And so by showing, and obviously in appropriate ways, opening up and expressing your own emotions and showing that you are human gives people the explicit permission, even if you don't say it, to also act in their humanness too and accept that. And it creates a space where your humanity is celebrated, and that's really healthy, because then we can do our best work when we're in that space. And then lastly, for communicating courageously, this one takes a lot of courage to do, taking off the mask of perfection. Even saying that, like that coming out of my mouth, like, is horrifying. And this can sound like, I don't know yet. So you have somebody ask you something, and your brain might say, oh my goodness, if I don't have an answer for them, I'm going to be perceived as incompetent. So let me make up something quick on the fly. Psychological safety looks like admitting, I don't know yet, and that's okay, and I'll get back to you. Or, I haven't thought of that yet. I need to do more research on that, and then maybe we can continue this conversation next week or in a few days. It's embracing when you want to put up a defense. It's letting the defense down and acting authentically with the person that you're engaging with.
And then secondly, second practical we would say is to assess, to affirm, and to alter. Assess. What does that mean? Who's heard of the SWOT analysis? SWOT analysis, it covers, it's an opportunity to sit around a table with the team members, with the spouse, and say, okay, what are the strengths of what's going on? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? And then what are the threats? And so if we take the time to assess strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, that can reveal then, here's what we're doing well, and let's celebrate that. Here's what we're not doing the best in, let's try to do better at that. And so it can reveal these possible gaps in what's going on. So taking time to assess in your teams within psychological safety could be something you could do. But then let's also affirm. Paul Tripp is attributed to this quote, actually, affirmation confirms identity. Paul Tripp wrote a book called Dangerous Calling. Wonderful book, third book that I'd recommend, Dangerous Calling by Paul Tripp. And he writes this phrase, affirmation confirms identity. When we continue to encourage and affirm one another, we are confirming the identity in who we are in Christ, confirming the identity of our giftings and our talents and our strengths and so on and so forth. So we need to take time to affirm one another, even if words of affirmation is not your strongest love language, because we can talk about that as well another time. But taking time to affirm colleagues and bosses and spouse is super, super helpful, super needed. Thirdly, not fun, but altering, there is a need to stop the bleeding. If there is something that is a threat, if there is something that is unhealthy, something that is toxic, you got to take steps to stop the bleeding, to cauterize the wound. That can look like so many different things. That could look like firing an employee. That could look like having a really, 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 really painful conversation with your best friend. That could look like having a really awkward conversation with a colleague. That could look like confessing something to someone. But stopping the bleeding is absolutely needed in order to get healthy and become spaces of psychological safety.
Yeah, that's good. I did want to clarify that my points are from the book, Tony's are not, which doesn't make them less than. I just wanted to clarify that.
Mine came from relatively my head.
Yeah, so see, that's why you're smarter. We want to talk about mastering the art of listening, and what does that look like? So there's some tangible plays here too. This one is really overused, but I think it's really important. The play of being fully present, taming your wandering mind. Like, what does that look like? That's not just putting your phone down and not texting while you're talking to somebody. That's committing to when your mind wanders off during a conversation because you think about something you have to do later or something that happened yesterday or what is this person thinking about me as these words are coming out of my mouth. It's committing to refocusing your attention and your energy on the person in front of you. And once again, that person includes their emotions, their experiences, and what makes them human, not just what you want to see from them. And so being fully present can look like a lot of different things for a lot of different people, but it's committing to redirecting your focus even when there are times in that conversation or in your interactions where you might be tempted to wander off. Also, this is probably one of my if I could pick a favorite, this is the most powerful. I don't even know if I have like the ability to say that, but committing to curiosity. This is going to sound like, tell me more. So somebody shares something with you and you might have a gut reaction to shut them down or to be defensive. That is your indication that you need to lean in and be curious with that person. Even if you do not agree with them, even if you do not find what they're saying to be helpful, a way that you can listen to somebody more and actually communicate with with your whole being that you care about them is by being curious about what they're saying, what makes them tick. Diving in. Curiosity helps us create a posture of humility rather than knowing it all, and that helps us be better listeners. We're not going to listen if we don't think that we have anything to gain from the person in front of us. And so committing to curiosity, that's important with yourself too. I could talk about this one for so long, but we're going to move on. And listening for emotion, so hearing what's not being said. This one's a little tricky. It can be tricky for everybody. I'm thinking more from like a therapeutic standpoint. This is kind of like what I'm trained to do, hear what's not being said. So somebody could be saying something on the surface level. They could be angry. They could be going off in your office about something that happened. But underneath, there's an unmet need where they don't feel safe, or where they feel threatened, or where they might feel threatened in their competency, or they don't feel heard, they don't feel valued. There's underlying needs there, and so if we just focus on the surface level behavior, we're gonna miss what's actually underneath. That one's also really hard, and there's not always time to do that, but when you can, prioritize listening for emotions and listening for what the root of the issue is when you're dealing with challenging situations on your team.
And number 4 is creating space for new ideas, even wild ones. Who has that friend or that colleague or that boss or that spouse that does anyone have that person that just is like, you're like, where in the world did you come up with that idea? Like, how did you come up like that out of nowhere, out of left field? And sometimes it's brilliant. And other times it's like, are you okay? And both could happen in a matter of seconds. Creating space for new ideas. Like, are we doing this as leaders? We're providing opportunity and space. Now, there's a time and a place for it. So not every single meeting, not every single conversation is meant to be a think tank, dump new ideas, because sometimes that's not going to get us anywhere if we always are just thinking about ideas. So having a space and designate space for ideas, even wild ones, because creativity needs oxygen. It needs that space to breathe and to come to life. And it needs a bit of wow before how. So often ideas, and because we are critical, we can be critical and not critical thinkers, we can always go to well, how's that going to work? Well, that's not, here's all the 5,000 reasons why your idea is terrible. Rather than be like, whoa, I like that because of this and this and this. And but the idea of wowing something before howing something is maybe a practice of building psychological safety. But then when the idea comes, let it simmer for a minute. Let's all sit on it and come back in a little bit. A little bit could be 5 minutes, a little bit could be 3 days, a little bit could be 5 months. But there is space that we need to wow before how, and there also are moments that we just say, okay, thanks for sharing that. Can we come back to that actually in the next meeting? Or hey, can I have a little bit of time to think on that one for a moment? That's not an unsafe thing to say. That's actually a wise thing to say. I need time to think about that. Where Ashton said earlier, I don't know yet. That is a good thing to sift through and process. But the baseline idea is, are you creating space for ideas to be voiced, even the crazy audacious ones, in your own headspace or with your teammates?
Yeah. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to manage our reactions. So when we're reacting and we're not aware of how we're reacting or how we're impacting people, there's a chance that we're probably causing psychological safety. So a way to ensure that we're at least moving towards psychological safety is being more aware and managing our reactions. So that looks like creating or being a non-defensive presence. We've talked about that a lot. When we have a defensive reaction at work, our brains often react as though they would if we were in physical danger. We talked about that a little bit more at the beginning. And so it truly is something, when our brains are in defensive mode, it really does create walls between us and our colleagues, us and our boss. And when we're in that space, there's not going to be great work that's happening. The work can happen when the walls come down because we were created for community. So being non-defensive is very important for you as leaders. Also, if you're not in your sphere of influence, if you're not necessarily, quote unquote, a leader, like in charge of a team at work, you can implement that at school, you can implement that with your friends, and so that one's really important. Another way to manage our reactions tangibly is by labeling our emotions. So once we have an idea, a concrete idea of what we're experiencing, that's when we can take control over it. If we don't know what's going on with ourselves, then we're probably going to be floundering, searching for control, and not getting control. So labeling our emotions can make us feel as though we're taking the control back. Labeling and recognizing our emotions in the moment allows for the emotional reactions to decrease, and then allows for our ability to think and reason to show back up again, so we can show back up as our whole selves and not just as our emotional selves. In this stage, we're remembering that psychological safety is about leading through our humanness, which also means making space for our emotions as well in a healthy way. The last one for managing our reactions is appreciate being challenged. This one is really hard, especially if our tendency is to be defensive. We're probably not going to say, hey, thanks a lot for challenging my idea or making me feel uncomfortable. But the more that we can appreciate being challenged, the more that we're telling our teammates and the people around us that you can do that again. I welcome this feedback in the future, rather than being defensive and giving them the idea that they are not welcome to come back to you in the future with new ideas or challenges.
The fire hose continues. Number
It
6.
sure does.
Embrace and invite productive conflict. Again, earlier we talked about psychological safety is not the absence of conflict, so what actually is it? And this is it's going to be harsh like language, but hopefully this will make sense. Number 1, embrace. The phrase that comes to mind for me is kill it before it kills you. What do I mean by that? Kill the conflict before the conflict kills your team. Kill the conflict before the conflict kills your marriage. Kill the conflict before the conflict just demoralizes the morality of your team. Kill the conflict before fill in the blank. We need to go on the offensive against conflict. I'm not in a flippant way, not in a not intentional way, not in a jerk way, but just we need to go after conflict and not shy away from it because it is killing, draining, threatening things of health. And we need to be willing to go after it. Number 2 is to invite. This goes right back actually to Ashton's last point about appreciate being challenged. Here's a question that's not fun. But if you were to ask, you're dealing with a conflict moment, and you ask the person across from you, say, hey, what's the final 10%? Meaning, what's the final 10% that you haven't said to me that you're afraid of how I'm going to react? Give them the space to say that. Because they're not going to want to, out of fear of how you're going to react probably. And even if you have a trusting relationship, even if you have a psychologically safe relationship with them, our fears get the better of us, true? So, having the space to ask someone, hey, is there anything left unsaid? What's the final 10% that you haven't said yet? And give them that space. Number 3, productive. Fighting with, not fighting with. What in the world does that mean? We're going to choose to fight with each other against an issue versus fight with each other. You're not fighting against each other, but so often we act like that, we think like that, me versus them. No, wrong thinking of conflict. Us against the issue. And how are we going against conflict in that way? I could go on and on about that. We'll probably have a whole seminar actually about conflict and confrontation in the future because it's so good and needed. Number 7.
That's good. So we want to get comfortable with embracing risk and failure. We talked about that a little bit in kind of the zones of psychological safety, and so some tangible ways are normalizing failure. So when this happens, saying something like, this is new to us, so we're going to experience failure. Almost planning for it, not in a way of not being prepared or failing because you didn't prepare, but just acknowledging that failure is a part of the growth process is really important so that people aren't afraid of it. Also, reframing failures as opportunities. So when somebody experiences a failure, whether it's your team or an individual, saying, what can we learn from this, rather than how can we prevent this from happening again? There will be failures. Let's get comfortable and see what we can learn from them and what they're telling us. And then lastly, getting comfortable with discomfort. I've kind of touched on this throughout tonight, but welcoming difficult emotions, not shying them away in order to kind of use emotions as flags and indications of deeper work that needs to be done. And lastly, we have designing inclusive rituals. So this is pretty simple. This can look like respecting all voices. Some of this is kind of like, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer. But this doesn't always happen in every space. And so I think it's important to talk about. So creating ground rules for what meetings look like. No interruptions, or nobody speaks twice before everybody speaks once. Ways that are tangibly incorporated so that everybody feels and knows that their voice is heard and valued.
So that was a lot. Let's take a few minutes. Final table talk. In our final table talk, what is a practical takeaway that you could implement from those 8 tomorrow? All right, hey, as we finish up, we land the plane of this conversation of psychological safety. There is just one final thing each of us would like to say as we end our time with a quote, and then I have one admin piece to share, and then we will be done.
So just wanting to remind you guys, first of all, thanking you for coming out and prioritizing this information in your life, and also reminding you that this information is meant to equip you, it's meant to encourage you, and it's meant to convict you, but it's not meant to condemn you. So as we're processing these things, as you take these things with you throughout the week, remind yourself of that, because I think a lot of times when we're learning new information and we're learning ways that we might be necessarily falling short, the devil likes to get in there and tell us that, well, you'll never be psychologically safe, or you've been so unsafe your whole life, there's no hope for you. And so as you're moving towards change, it's possible, and you are not too far from grace. And so just reminding yourself that this is to empower and encourage you and not condemn you. So we appreciate you being here and taking the time. If there's things that have come up for you during this time that you think, oh, wow, I should probably talk to somebody about this, you can contact Tony or I, and we'd love to help you kind of on your next steps of what that looks like. If that's talking to a professional, if that's talking to a friend, talking to one of us to process a little bit more, we're here to do that with you. So thank you.
And we fully know that there will be moments that we are not safe people for an individual. And I really hate to admit that and own that, but it's true. Because we're broken too. Just because we have a mic set does not mean that we are any further along in this conversation and we can't make mistakes. So we have to continually work on ourselves of what it means to not condemn ourselves when we make mistakes. But friends, our goal here is not perfection, it's progress. Our goal here is not perfection, it is progress. Every single day we are working towards the big fancy word of sanctification, the process of becoming more and more holy. If you strive towards this perfection thing, you're going to stress the heck out of yourself. One step at a time, one win at a time, one conversation at a time, one God moment at a time. He's faithful and he's going to get you through. And he's the safe one that we can always rely on. Even when there's people around us that would be unsafe, and even when we ourselves are the unsafe ones. So thank you for coming and being willing to commit yourself to learning, to leadership. It does not go unnoticed and unseen. And 2 quotes to end our time. I just want the quote to speak for themselves. From a sense of leader once more. We need an environment where we sense the freedom to be who we are within boundaries framed by values and a common goal. We need to feel we are safe and supported as whole people who have significant things to contribute despite our differences. We need to be creative. And we need to communicate with these kinds of people who have the information we do not, because none of us know everything. We need each other. And we need an environment around us that acknowledges and supports these facts.
At the risk of sounding trite, it is that simple. As leaders of families, organizations, and other groups, we are responsible for creating the environments we live and work in. It is our choice that determines the course of culture. Let's pray. Jesus, thanks for this time. Thank you for this day. Thank you for these people who are actively engaged in the process of sanctification and striving to learn more about how you've created us. Thank you for the advances you've allowed scientists to make in this area, psychologists to make, so that we can better understand how you've wired us, so that we can better serve each other and better interact with each other. We thank you so much just for your grace that equips us to be able to continue on in this process. And I just pray for everybody as they leave tonight that you would equip them with your Holy Spirit to continue doing this difficult but very, very, very rewarding work. And anything that comes from tonight or for further conversations, we give you the glory for that. Amen.
Amen. Amen. 4 things. Number 1, the next seminar, if you are a planner and if you are a scheduler, March 12th with Susan Pasella, and we're going to talk about unstuck leadership. We're going to talk about your overcoming your mindset and mental ruts. So if you are a culprit of negative thinking and being stuck in mental ruts and being overwhelmed by your own brain and that's stopping you in your leadership, this could be for you. And Susan is going to walk us through a lot of really cool things around more about the brain and more about how we can overcome mental ruts in our leadership. The registration is already open. There's a QR code. You go to the Church Center app. It's there for you to sign up. Number 2 is we have a Develop Leadership podcast that launches the first Wednesday of every single month, and that is tomorrow. And we are going to have a second-time guest of Johnny Damon to talk about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. That seminar was like a year ago, so you get to hear the truncated version of that if you tune into the podcast on Apple Music and Spotify, YouTube, and the church website is all there for you. Number 3, please take some food as you go. That would be very helpful.
It's the best part.
Because the church staff doesn't really need that all around the tables as much as we do love it. We don't need it at the same time. And number 4, and finally, friends, you are loved and you are valued. Thank you for being here.
And you belong here.
And you belong here.
You forgot. That's my favorite part.
Oh, sorry. And you belong here. I was going to say it. You just beat me to it.
I'm sorry.
You belong here. Get out of here. Have a great night.
I couldn't let you forget that one.